FSN Radio. It's all about what's next. Go to financialsurvivalnetwork.com and sign up for your free weekly newsletter. You'll also get 3 free reports. The Financial Survival Network. It's all about what's next.
Welcome. You're listening to the Financial Survival Network. I'm Kerry Lutz, and the date is Monday, May 4th. We made it through that historic holiday, May 1st. That's May Day, celebration of communism, that wonderful system that's brought happiness to so many of you out there. And John Rubino's on with us, dollarcollapse.com. Check out his site. I do every day. And while you're at it, his book, The Money Bubble, that he co-wrote with James Turk, which we haven't had on the show recently. We'll have to get him back on. I'll talk to Melissa, my producer, booking agent, make sure she gets him on. And John, how are you?
I'm all right, Kerry. How are you doing?
I'm okay. Got a great article on here about solar power. And there was a big announcement last week, but solar power idea whose time has finally arrived, isn't it?
It is, at long last. Yeah. Solar's been around since at least the 1970s when Jimmy Carter put solar panels on the White House roof. But the numbers never worked. The solar was way too expensive and unreliable. And so the power you got from solar panels was just a lot more expensive than what you got from the local utility. So it wasn't really a viable alternative energy source. But in the ensuing 4 decades, solar's price has gone down year after year after year, and which makes sense because basically solar panels are kind of microprocessors. So it makes sense that they would get cheaper over time. And now it's at the point where in a few markets around the world, rooftop solar is actually cheaper than coal-fired power plant derived electricity delivered by the local utility. And so that is beginning to open the floodgates. Solar is growing exponentially around the world and becoming a force in the power market. For instance, it's only 1% of U.S. electricity generation capacity, but it's about 1/3 of the new capacity coming online here. And it's an even bigger percentage in China and Japan and a few other parts of the world where power issues are even more compelling than they are here. China's pollution is outrageous and it's growing, so it needs a lot of new power. And so they have an incentive to add a lot of solar. Japan had a horrendous experience with a nuclear power plant, which is still ongoing, and so they have an incentive to go to non-risky sources of electricity. So anyhow, the development last week was that Elon Musk's company Tesla introduced a battery technology that can be combined with solar panels on your roof so that you put the panels up top and the batteries in the basement. And during the daytime, the solar panels charge the batteries and the batteries run the house at night. And so you're almost off grid in theory. And right now, the combination in most parts of the U.S. is still too expensive to be a great deal just in dollars and cents terms. But in a few places with local subsidies, it does work. And what it does do right now is generate sales which allow bigger factories to be built, which allow economies of scale to kick in and keep pushing the price of both solar and batteries down. And then as they get cheaper, they become economic in more and more markets. So you get positive momentum building up. And there's really no end in sight to how cheap both solar and new generation batteries can become. So what will happen in the future, very probably, is that this technology gets a little cheaper every year and therefore becomes economic in more and more places. And so it's a growth story with legs. It just keeps on getting better and better for the foreseeable future. And as it does so, as it gets cheaper, it puts a lid on fossil fuel prices. In other words, if you're running a coal-fired power plant, you can't charge more for that electricity than rooftop solar costs. And as rooftop solar gets cheaper and cheaper, you have to lower your prices or you go out of business if you're a utility. You have to close that coal-fired power plant and find some other source of electricity to sell to people if you want to stay in your current business model. And so that's a real challenge for the existing energy infrastructure, but it's great for everybody else. If we can put solar panels on our roof and use them to charge our electric car and never have to buy gas, and it's a really nice lifestyle in theory, and it's becoming reality for more and more people. So the world is changing in terms of energy dramatically, and a big part of the change is happening right this minute. This is kind of the inflection point, and so it'll get better from here.
I'm excited about it, and like you say, it's multiple technologies advancing incrementally. It's nothing that really, no revolutionary breakthrough that you had solar panels go up 5 times in efficiency that just blow away everything. It's microprocessors, it's battery technology, it's solar technology, each going up a couple percent every couple of years. And finally, they all converge. And then all of a sudden, it's like, wow, this is really good. It's so much better. And all of a sudden, it's, wow, there's a competitive advantage or less of a competitive disadvantage. And then you throw in the accommodating loser of government who says, oh, well, we want solar because solar is good. And you got all these misguided people who don't understand economics, who weren't schooled properly, who said, oh, we just have to get rid of dirty coal and dirty oil and nuclear. We don't want to glow in the dark, and just hop on whatever subsidies you want. Just keep giving the subsidies. Just keep giving them and giving them. So you have malinvestment combined with that. And my brother-in-law, he's had solar panels on his roof for about 8 years in Arizona. They make no economic sense, mind you, but he realizes a net after-tax return because he gets to sell power back to his local utility. The government forces the utility to accept his power sales at an artificially high price. He gets a subsidy. He gets a whole bunch of government-forced goodies. So it's made sense for him to do it. But now, because they're that much more efficient, even when the government starts to scale back some of those goodies, John, it's going to make a lot of sense for more people to do it. They won't need a PhD in economics to figure out, hey, this really makes sense.
Yeah, in a handful of markets, it's not true everywhere, but there is grid parity in a few markets where there's a lot of sunshine and where electricity is already fairly expensive. Grid parity means that solar on your rooftop is as cheap as what the local utility can deliver to your house. And as solar gets cheaper year after year, then grid parity will spread to more and more markets, and it won't require government subsidies to continue to spread. In the meantime, now I'm not a climate scientist, so I'm not going to say anything that will get me in trouble about climate change. But it's definitely the perception of a lot of governments that climate change is a real thing and that it needs to be addressed. And so there's a good chance that subsidies continue even as solar gets cheap enough to be competitive on its own. And that really turbocharges the market. If something is already a good deal and the government's going to give you 20% off, then there's no reason not to do it. And there are installers out there like Solar City that can put a package together on really, really attractive terms for homeowners, where they'll come in, put the solar panels on your roof, the batteries in your basement, without you having to do anything, and give you a monthly payment that's lower than your current utility bill. So on those terms, huge numbers of people are saying, well, okay, come on in, and so across California, for instance, solar is growing like crazy, in large part because these installers are able to take care of everything for you. All you have to do is write a smaller check each month than you currently write. That's your entire contribution to the process. So as that business model spreads to other sunny parts of the U.S. and then to the rest of the world, again, this market has legs, because if they make it this easy and this cheap, more and more people are going to say yes to it. And as solar gets cheaper and cheaper, it's easier for them to package really attractive deals. So, and to go back to batteries, that's really the key to the whole thing. As battery technology gets better, all of this stuff becomes possible because intermittent energy sources like solar and wind are fatally flawed because they only work half the time, right? But if you combine them with really efficient, fairly cheap batteries that they can charge during their uptime and then discharge during their downtime, then you have a system that is comparable to coal in terms of continuous process. And you've got a real market competitor that can run baseload power for utilities. And that's what we're building right now. The battery technology isn't quite here yet, but it's getting here. Lithium-ion batteries get cheaper year after year, and other new battery technologies are coming online that might be better once they're perfected. And so it's a really dynamic market where the trends are all in positive directions. So I think a decade from now, we'll know which new battery technology is going to win out, and we'll have a real sense of how cheap it's possible for battery tech to get. But I think right now we can say with some certainty that it's going to be a lot cheaper than today's technologies. And that's going to be good enough because today's technologies work sort of kind of in certain circumstances. So if we already have something that's almost workable, it doesn't take a lot of improvement to end up with something that's very workable, something that is completely fine for its application and makes growth possible. So that's what we're headed for. And I don't think there's anything technically standing in the way of another really good decade of falling solar prices and improving battery economics and widening market acceptance. This is a market that looks like it has a nice stretch of growth kind of baked into the cake.
And then as libertarians, we like it because it's diffusion of power. It diffuses the government's power because indirectly the government's in charge of the power grid, directly or indirectly, because the utilities all rely on government to maintain their power, keep out competitors, and set rates and allow them to earn a return or not earn a return, as it often winds up, to build new power plants. That's all about the government. Really, this indirectly restricts government power when you get down to it. Government hasn't thought this through yet, but really government doesn't like solar power when you get down to it because it is a encroachment on government power, and decentralization of electric power means decentralization of government control over a very basic human requirement in modern society. Because, hey, once your lights go out, you're kind of back there with the Stone Age. Everything that you want and need, your computers, your lights, your artificial climate control, your refrigeration, your cooking, it all goes out the window, and you're basically not much different than the settlers that settled the country a couple hundred years ago. So big chunk of the government's power is taken away with this solar. They just haven't figured it out yet. Otherwise, they wouldn't be so in favor of it, John.
I'm sure they're conflicted because on the one hand, they like the whole staving off global warming thing. And they also like the idea that rooftop solar, to the extent that it spreads widely, makes blackouts less likely. Right now, a terrorist or a cyber terrorist or a simple glitch can take down an entire power grid. You blow up one serious power plant, a nuclear plant or a coal plant, and a big part of that market is without electricity. And that's very scary, especially to local governments, but also to the national government. So to the extent that you have a decentralized power grid, that's a good thing from a national security standpoint, right? So governments like that.
Yes.
They like a robust power grid. But they're probably uncomfortable with, as you said, the diffusion of power. If more and more people are self-reliant, then they're harder to push around. Mm-hmm. And on some level, I'm sure governments are uncomfortable with that.
Yeah, very.
So it's just part of the package, though. They have to accept it.
Yeah, well, and that goes through on so many things. Monetary policy, right? If you're not reliant on those electronic currency credits that we call dollars on deposit with your too big to fail bank, all of a sudden the government has less control of you. And if you're growing your own food, not that I advocate that because It's just not practical for most of you out there to be growing your own food, but some of it. And if you have your own chickens, right? All these cities that have outlawed keeping chicken coops for no particular reason. Not that I'm doing it. I just don't really like having farm animals in my backyard, messing up the pool and all that. But look, the less dependent you are on these formalized societal structures, the less control there is over you. And this is just another example of that.
Yeah, yeah. It's it's a trade-off right now. It could be that the war on cash is a partial reaction to the decentralization of the power grid. It's getting power in one area to offset the fact that you're losing power in another area. But yeah, lots of things are happening right now, and they are all kind of a mixed bag. There's good and bad in most of what's going on out there in the world, with the exception of increasing debt levels, which are just plain bad. That's the one thing that kind of overrides everything else. We're borrowing so much money for so many dumb things that we're kind of guaranteeing the big crisis that's out there somewhere. But a lot of technological trends are incredibly positive right now.
Right.
And a few business model trends are also really positive.
Oh, the internet really is to go to the Daily Bell theme of the Gutenberg printing press. The internet empowered more people to do more things than any societal trend in history. And why is there the Great Firewall of China? When you get down to it, they're scared to death of it, because the smarter people get, the more they see the idiocy of the government around them. And you go back to H.L. Mencken, one of the greatest anti-government people in the U.S. of all time. You just read his collective wisdom about your government, and it's truer today than it was then. I mean, he was over 100 years ago writing his rants about the stupidity of government, and boy, government hasn't gotten any better in that period of time. And government was much less intrusive back in his day, and now it's so much worse. And man, the man was so far ahead of his time.
Yeah, well, a lot of this is due to technology as well. The internet, for instance, like you said, it's a force for freedom because it allows people to communicate and to educate themselves in ways that we couldn't do back when you and I were kids. But it's also a means of control and surveillance.
Yeah.
Now that we all have smartphones tied into the internet, we're trackable. And soon, if that's how we're going to do most of our transacting, then we're really trackable. Then everything we do and where we do it is part of a database that can be mined and can be used for things that we might not necessarily approve of. So it's all a trade-off. Increasing power leads to increasing risk.
And dependence. And so, don't forget dependence too.
Yeah.
And then when
the risk of dependence on the government, and so we can never rest. In other words, if you want to be a free individual, you have a responsibility for maintaining it. You can't just assume that that's the case and just go on with your life and not be concerned with the downside of a lot of the good stuff that's happening. As bandwidth increases and you spend more and more of your life online. That's, as far as it goes, a really good thing if it improves your life as you define it. But it also empowers people who might want to do you harm. And so you have to pay attention to that. And that's really, part of the big battle that's going on right now is people trying to scale back the power that's accruing to government and that government is abusing, and big corporations, and right now we're losing. Government is increasing in power, and corporations are doing things that would have seemed incredibly outrageous in the past. All the financial engineering that's going on that they're getting away with, and a lot of the labor market stuff that's happening. These are things that shouldn't have been allowed to happen, but are becoming easier and easier as technology makes it more and more possible.
Yeah, that's totally true. And you and I are like lone voices crying in the dark, and nobody seems to care about it. And
well, because it's complicated. Most people don't understand, or most people don't spend their lives obsessing about it the way, the handful of people in the sound money community and the Libertarian Party, et cetera, do. And so unless you really spend hours and hours thinking this stuff through, it's like oatmeal. It's incredibly complicated, and it's not clear what's really happening. And so I think that's the case for most people. The average person goes to work, comes home, hangs out with their family, hangs out with their friends, and really doesn't have a lot of spare brain cells to pay attention to what the NSA is doing. Or there's a comedy show by John Oliver on the Comedy Channel, spinoff of Jon Stewart's Daily Show. And he did a survey a while ago where he went around and asked people what they thought of Edward Snowden. And most people had no idea who he was. So this huge leak, the biggest revelation of our generation about bad things the government is doing. And most people hadn't even heard of it, or if they had heard of it, they thought of him as some sort of spy who'd betrayed the country. And so that's really scary, but it's not all that surprising because, as I said, it's complicated and most people don't really have the time or the inclination to pay that much attention to it. So we have a big education process going on here that really needs to progress. People really need to start paying attention to what's happening out there because on the one hand, it's very exciting, like you and I started out with solar power. And on the other hand, it's terrifying with the government abusing the powers that come from a networked world. And so complicated, fascinating world out there, Kerry.
Yeah, that is for certain. And you can't just take anything for granted, John. I think that's really the takeaway from it because, man, it's just evolving so quickly and there's so much happening so quickly that it's impossible to keep track of it, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, how do you keep track of it all? Difficult. Yeah. Very, very difficult, and it can just get away so quickly. Anyway, got to go visit John at dollarcollapse.com. Sign up for his newsletter, missives, when he's got his new articles going up, buy his book, The Money Bubble. And as always, you can find the links to his site over at my site, financialsurvivalnetwork.com. We're in the midst of a big redesign because Google's changing all their searching algorithms. Sign up for our webinars. We got one coming up pretty quick, and you won't believe the names involved. And hey, while you're there, visit the site. Stefan is working tirelessly, 24/7, getting you the news that's really important. Got great articles up there, not to mention much of John's collective work. And John, we'll talk to you next Monday. Be well.
Thanks, Kerry. You too.
FSN Radio. It's all about what's next. Go to financialsurvivalnetwork.com and sign up for your free weekly newsletter. You'll also get 3 free reports. The Financial Survival Network. It's all about what's next.